Hey guys, it's Leslie, and we are at part 2 of the discussion about expectations. And this month, we're going to be talking about expectations and fantasy. So, for myself personally, I can say I was definitely influenced growing up by movies, TV shows, and songs, and what it all became in my head was a fantasy of what I wanted. One song I will never forget is Endless Love from the movie Endless Love. And I remember hearing that song when I was a little girl, and I was just thinking, oh my God, how wonderful is this song? And just thinking about the future and how I would be in love and I'd be able to sing this song with someone and my husband, and it'd be like, my endless love. Not to mention music videos, right? So the music video has you just go right there in that moment with all the highlights of what they have going on in their life, and they're out sailing, they're on the yacht doing all this wonderful stuff, and you're thinking like, why do I not have that in my life? Whether you're married or single or a little girl, you're just thinking like, man, how perfect would that be? I mean, have you seen that music video, All of Me by John Legend? So not only is he talking about how all of him loves all of her, but you see all the pictures and the scenes of all this amazing stuff that they're doing in their life, right? One of my favorite songs when I was little was by Regina Belle, Baby Come to Me. So I would just listen to that song and then I'd just be thinking like, don't get me started about TV shows. So I can't say there's only one. There's 2 TV shows that I think gave a tremendous picture of like this fantasy world of what a family is like. Of course, I'm going to say The Cosby Show. What child in the 80s did not watch The Cosby Show and wish they had a perfect family just like the Cosbys? The other show we created fantasies based on was The Simpsons. No, just kidding. The other show we created fantasies about was Leave It to Beaver, right? So you had the Cleavers, the mom, the dad, the Beeb, and Wally, and everything was just always so perfect and pristine, and they handled all their conflicts perfectly, and there was no issues. Well, that becomes a fantasy in our minds of what the way it's supposed to be in our household. So I have to admit, I have a movie that's like one of my absolute favorite movies of all times, and it is You've Got Mail. I love this movie so much that when I went to New York with my sisters for my sister's 50th birthday, I almost had a meltdown when we were in Central Park. We weren't in the exact same place, but all it took for me was to think about the scene from You've Got Mail. I wanted it to be you. I wanted it to be you so badly. Brinkley! Brinkley! Well, needless to say, the music, the camera shots, the acting, all those things from that movie created an expectation in me of a feeling that you're supposed to have in order to feel like loving or to feel that things are going great in your relationship or in your life. Well, the expectations in this other movie I'm going to mention had nothing to do with necessarily relationships with the opposite sex, but this ultimate friendship that these young ladies had in Waiting to Exhale. They are able to hang out all the time. They're able to chill out at one another's apartments and cry and laugh and watch movies. And so looking at that creates a fantasy of what your friendship life should be looking like. And if it's not looking like that right now, you're wondering, what is going on with me? Why do I not have a perfect friendship? Why am I not going on a girls' trip every year? So here's the deal. What is the definition of a fantasy anyway? A fantasy is the faculty or activity of imagining things, especially things that are impossible or improbable. So whether we want to admit it or not, all of us have some type of fantasy that we have in our mind, some idea of what we believe should be happening, what we believe should be true, the way that we believe someone should act, or this picture in our mind that we've seen, whether it was from a family that we saw growing up, a family that we think has everything perfect going on in their home right now. Someone has a fantasy job. There's even fantasy sports leagues. But we sit there and then we fantasize about that particular thing that other person or those other people have going on. And then we go back to our own lives and we look at the reality of what we're dealing with. And then we feel like, why don't I have that? So I have a couple questions. As you're dealing with those fantasies, these are the things that you're going to need to think about. One is the moment. The moment when you see this particular movie, hear this song, or whatever the situation is, and you realize in that moment that this is what you want, either compared to what you have now or just something that looks like it would be amazing to have, right? So when you have that moment, you then have a setup, right? So you have a setup of when I have the opportunity to move into this particular space or relationship, this is what I expect to happen. I want it to look just like this other thing that I have fantasized about, right? The next thing that happens is what we call the upset. The thing didn't happen. It just didn't look like what you wanted. The music was not playing. All the parts were not spoken the way that it was spoken in your head, in your fantasy. The trip didn't work out. There was an argument that was had that disrupted that fantasy thought that you had in your mind. So then we have to ask ourselves, was it realistic to even expect that? And am I going to give that person a break, or that situation a break, or in even some instances, give God a break because that thing did not work out exactly the way you fantasized? And you have to ask yourself, I have to ask myself, was it even reasonable for me to expect that things were going to work out according to that fantasy that I've had in my mind? I mean, come on. Some of these fantasies have been in our minds since we were 4, 5 years old, because they were pictures that were painted and implanted on our minds about what we want, the way that it should be. And if we're not careful, if we don't get those fantasies in check, we're going to set ourselves up for a cycle of these unmet expectations that were based on fantasy that was not realistic. Some of them were impossible. Some of them were just improbable. And if we don't get those things checked in our minds, then we're going to continually go down that cycle. That's what I want to talk about for the month of February. We know what's coming this weekend. We know what's coming next week. We have to ask ourselves, that thing that you are looking forward to during this Valentine's month, during Valentine's week, next week, is it reasonable? Is it possible? Is it probable? And not only regards to Valentine's Day, but even this year, the goals that we came up with this year may have been based on fantasy. We have to go back and look at them. We have to ask God to show us an expectation that is proper and that is reasonable, so that we don't set ourselves up for failure. Because as we are learning, true and lasting peace can only be found in ourselves and within our relationships when we deal with our heart's improper expectations. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.